Today on Listen Up, beyond the headlines and into the trenches, counting the cost for Afghanistan, next. Welcome to Listen Up. I'm Lorna Duick. Afghanistan has ruled the headlines recently, with President Obama announcing a surge in sending U.S. troops and Prime Minister Stephen Harper declaring an end to the Canadian mission in 2011. Securing a stable future for the war-torn country was also top of the agenda at the London conference. 70 nations attended, with a controversial strategy emerging from the talks: paying off the Taliban for peace, a bribe. With a majority of the Canadians opposed to Canada's mission in Afghanistan, pulling out may seem like a popular political move. But what of the sacrifices that have already been made by soldiers and their families? We're exploring that concept, sacrifice, from a Christian perspective. And we'll also explore what sacrifice looks like as our cameras followed New York Times bestseller and Nobel Peace Prize nominee Greg Mortensen in his latest campaign to build schools, not bombs, in Afghanistan. But first, he's been called the most qualified Canadian observer of Afghanistan. Former Canadian ambassador to Afghanistan and former deputy head of the United Nations missions there, Chris Alexander, joins us now in studio to explain why our support is still needed in that devastated country. Chris, welcome to Listen Up TV.
Thanks very much.
You have called the Afghanistan challenge one of the greatest tests of our time. What do you mean?
Well, look back at the 20th century, at what Canada and other countries have done with their military forces, but also with development assistance, to bring countries into the family of countries that seek to have democratic systems, seek to have market economies. There was a lot of work to be done on this score after 1989, when the Warsaw Pact fell apart, the Soviet Union fell apart. Europe has been united. Many countries of the world have stepped away from conflict because countries like Canada have played a role. Since 2001, I would argue, Afghanistan has been the main international focus for this kind of effort. Afghanistan went through 30 years of war. Their standard of living plummeted over that time, and it's taken longer than anyone expected to bring them back to a level where stability is once again possible. But if we achieve that goal, the benefits can be huge.
I was shocked to hear we're going to now be involved in paying off Talibs. $100 million, 25,000 Taliban soldiers left. Is this going to work to bribe off the Talib fighters?
Bribery will never work. And I think that term has only been used by the detractors of this idea.
So I shouldn't call it a bribe. The $100 million paying off the soldiers.
Well, you're right. It's been portrayed as that. But I think there is an upside to this. In every counterinsurgency, you need to put pressure on the insurgents to no longer be with the extremists, to no longer be with the top Taliban leadership who want to overthrow the Kabul government by force. But when that pressure starts to work, military pressure, political pressure, cultural pressure, you need to give them a path back from the battlefield into normal life. Most of the low-level, mid-level Taliban will take that path ultimately, but it needs to be structured, it needs to be supervised, it needs to give them an opportunity, probably not cash, and it needs to protect them.
Canada, really, some would say the Parliament prorogued over the scandal on the Afghan detainees. What's your opinion on how our country has broken down over the detainee crisis?
Well, detainees is actually a relatively small issue involving small numbers of people. The big issue is the rule of law and justice in Afghanistan. And I think if one looks at the past 9 years, this has been a sector, Afghan courts, prosecutors, police, prisons, where the investment has not been large enough. And of course there were abuses in the Afghan justice system. It was weak, it was unreformed, and we were obliged to use it because there wasn't an alternative. But that needs to start to end.
So do we just say we don't need to put the microscope onto the detainee issue, and do we need to say let's move on with what other issues Canadians should be debating there?
No, we should continue to have what happens to people in the Afghan justice system under the microscope and in clear view. We shouldn't be happy with prison conditions across Afghanistan. We shouldn't be happy with the way that drug traffickers can buy their way out of court. And even people who've laid IEDs for the last several years might be charged, but if they can bring enough money from their sponsors across the border, they can buy their way out of the justice system. That should be a concern. And until it's reformed, until it's professional, until it's no longer corrupt, we should be worried, and we should be investing and supporting the reformers in the Afghan government who want change.
Okay, 2011 has been set as the pullout date for Canadian troops. What would be your approach to what we should do in the future? Is it time to pull out?
Well, Canada's decision stands. It's definitely going to be time in 2011 to do something different. The Prime Minister has said, and I think this approach has a huge amount of support inside Canada and outside, that the focus should be on civilian tasks, on development, humanitarian affairs. But quite frankly, we're in a new zone with regard to Afghanistan this year. We're going to see counterinsurgency prosecuted on the scale that was needed for the first time only this year as these U.S. troops arrive.
You were spending a large part of your duties running the latest Afghan election. Lots of critics of that election, and yet you believe it was a success, and now we're waiting on the next round. Are you optimistic?
Well, there were some serious problems. The fraud was on a huge scale, unacceptable scale, and I think the Election Commission and others in the campaigns themselves bear responsibility for that. I thought the UN, including my successor, were not at their best in disputing publicly the results. You may recall my successor was fired from the mission. That's unprecedented in my memory of UN missions, and it damaged the credibility of the international community. But there is good news. The fraud that took place was detected, almost all of it, and the fraudulent votes were thrown out.
All right, Chris Alexander, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And when Listen Up returns, we'll hear more from those who are involved on the very front lines of healing Afghanistan. That's next.
When a woman has an education, she's much less likely to encourage her son to get into violence or into terrorism.